Hey everybody, my name is Bradley Williams, a proud graduate of Central and serving today as the lead minister at Forum Christian Church in Columbia, Missouri. Here's what we're going to do over the next 25 minutes. We're going to explore 3 simple things that you can do right now to be more successful at knowing where God is leading you, finding the right ministry fit, and being able to present the real you throughout the interview process. It's not as easy as you might think. More specifically, here are 3 things that we're going to talk about: planning, preparation, and performance. Let's jump right in. By far, the most important part of this process is the planning. Right now, you are actually planning to succeed or you're planning to fail. F. Matthias Alexander once said this: people do not decide their futures, they decide their habits, and their habits decide their futures. It's your disciplines. It's the things you're doing right now, your habits and the decisions that you're making today. That's actually creating a path that you're going to walk tomorrow. And if there was one thing I would want to say to the old me sitting in class at Central right now, I would say, stop wasting your time and your energy and your resources and your money on stuff that does not matter and will not produce the life that you're going to want to live in the future. So, 3 things to start doing right now to plan for a successful life and serving in ministry. The number 1 thing I would encourage you to do is pray. Pray really big, bold prayers like what we see in Colossians chapter 1, where Paul would say something like this, like, we are going to ask God to give you a complete knowledge of his will and give you a spiritual wisdom and understanding, because that's the way that we will live lives that honor God, and it's the way that we're going to produce every kind of good fruit. Like, we're going to get to know God better and better through that kind of life. Prayer is one of the most important aspects of being a follower of Jesus, and one of the most critical aspects to being successful in any area of life. And I cannot overemphasize this enough, that, like, go throughout the New Testament and see how the earliest followers of Jesus, how did they pray? They weren't surface level prayers for things that often consume our prayer life, little bitty surface things. They were asking for boldness. Like we see that in the earliest believers in Acts, like, let us be bold. They weren't asking to, like, free us from pain and suffering. It was like, help open the hearts and eyes of other people. Let the gospel saturate everything that we do. Like, that comes from an intimate relationship. And I would just say, like Paul says at the end of Colossians, like, let the word of Christ dwell in your life richly. And listen, from this moment on, if I could encourage you, let everything that you do come from this overflow and this relationship that you have with Jesus. Because as ministry in life, like, listen, it gets difficult. And I know that may be hard to hear from your vantage point right now, but sometimes you get pressure from all these different areas of life. Like, ask anybody serving in ministry, how do you handle the pressures and expectations of all the other people? How do you constantly pour out into so many people? Ask them that question, and invariably, you're going to get some really poignant answers. And they're going to tell you, yeah, the work is really hard, but everything that they do, it comes from this intimate relationship they have with God. And if they're not connected on that level, they're not going to last in ministry. So listen, you wouldn't go like run a marathon today. Hopefully, you wouldn't be successful at it, right? You'd have to start preparing and training months, even years ahead. A buddy of mine just finished a marathon just a couple weeks ago, and I watched him train for months, running a little bit more every single day. That helped him be successful. And even though he could run the actual 26 miles of a marathon, he got to race day, he was all prepared, and that marathon was still difficult. And he'd say this to anybody, like, that was really hard, but it was totally worth it. And I'm really saying, like, the same thing to you. Ministry is difficult, it's hard, but there's no higher calling. There's no more work on this planet that's more fulfilling, and I think there's nothing as exciting as ministry. And that being said, listen, prepare now. Start planning right now by praying for guidance, wisdom, spiritual understanding, for this deep sense of God's presence in your life. Let that be the starting point. Operate out of that relationship with God and foster it right now in your life. Okay, so second thing I would encourage you to do is to plan by serving. The greatest opportunity you have right now, one of them, is to get involved in a local ministry and see how things work in a real ministry context. I mean, academics are great. Learning proper theology is absolutely critical. I think right doctrine leads to right practice, and you're learning right doctrine. But start applying those truths in a ministry context. Get some experience now. I mean, get that experience without the pressures that come along with that ministry position, right? Do it as an intern. Make some connections. Start serving. You know, at Forum, we've had a lot of interns over the years, and out of all of them, there was one individual, I would have hired them immediately. She was absolutely off the charts. And the reason why I wanted to hire her so badly is because she had a couple qualities and skills that honestly I'm always looking for. They had a clear connection to Jesus. It poured out of them. You could see it in their lifestyle and their prayers, and her work ethic was absolutely phenomenal. And she had a desire to serve that was so evident, I think I could have put her in any position in the church, and she would have made it better, and she would have thrived. And listen, she was only 19 at the time. And all those qualities, she had developed them for years before she ever came to Forum. It wasn't like she just showed up as an intern and said, okay, now I'm going to be this kind of person. That's not how it works. So listen, one other thing about planning, prioritize. You've got to prioritize everything that you're doing, whether it's in ministry, whether it's in your relationships, whether it's in studying for tests, in any area of your life. One of the most overlooked areas of planning is in how we prioritize. So what you're going to spend your time and your energy on, it matters. Start aligning those priorities now. Just ask yourself, what do I believe God is calling me to do? And then consider, what am I doing today to get there? How am I going to spend my time and my limited number of hours today? I mean, in a world of constant distractions, your ability to focus is at an all-time low. There's this Nobel Prize winning professor, Herbert Simon. He once said something like this: information consumes the attention of its recipients, and a wealth of information creates a poverty of attention. What are you paying attention to? Your ability to prioritize and focus, it will dramatically impact your ability to be successful at anything you do. All right, recap real quick. 3 simple things you can do right now to be more successful at knowing where God is leading you, finding that right ministry fit, and being able to present the real you throughout the interview process starts with planning. Make plans today to grow deeper in your prayer life. Make plans today to serve in a local ministry context, and start today prioritizing what's most important. It's going to help you succeed, I promise. All right, number 1 was planning. Now on to number 2, preparation. Having gone through the numerous rounds of hiring in the past 10 years, this is absolutely an area that can set you apart from the rest of the people who might be applying for the same ministry position. The last position that we hired for was a middle school minister. We ended up interviewing 10 candidates, and only 2 of them made it through to the second interview. And then only 1 made it through to the third. And thankfully, he survived the remaining 2 to become our newest team member. We're thrilled to have him on board. He was successful in large part because he was absolutely prepared. So I want us to think of this really in 2 main areas: homework and in your resume. So first, homework. Before you apply for a position, and after you have spent like just a ton of time praying and serving and prioritizing, start doing some research about various churches that you might want to serve in, about their beliefs, about their location. You may even give them a phone call and talk about their structure, their debt load, their current ministry staff, and what needs they have. Because in today's market, there are plenty of resources out there to help you be successful. And one big advantage that you have is this class that you're in right now. And an overlooked, incredible resource you have right now is the professor in this classroom. Start asking questions. Get serious, get inquisitive. It makes a huge difference. In our hiring process, like, we ended every interview with this question: do you have any questions for us? And almost every single candidate sat there in stunned silence, creating this final moment that was super awkward and not good. The ones that did ask questions made a lasting impression because it showed us they were proactive, they had done some homework, and they were prepared. It means a lot to a minister. Like, I'm a lead minister in this difficult role. I'm trying to find the people that God wants to be on this team, and I'm also thinking, who could I pour time, energy, and resources for years to come? Secondly, after you've done your homework, create a killer resume. It matters. the look matters, the content matters. It all matters. Before you've ever spoken a verbal word, you've communicated volumes by your resume. So over the past 10 years, I've seen some absolutely horrible resumes that single-handedly did not even get them to an interview. Have someone proofread it, correct the spelling and grammatical errors, do a Google search for what a professional resume looks like, and just copy the style. It's such an easy step that's often overlooked and can make a huge impact on even getting that first interview. And listen, I'm just being straight with you. This isn't like some theory. This isn't some, classroom lecture on how to be successful. This is like legitimate real life experience. Your resume matters. Have the best resume in the room. Stand out on paper before you ever stand out in person, and you're gonna be one step ahead of the game. And also, don't lie on your resume. Don't pad your resume with silly little anecdotes or where you think you're trying to show off your unique personality. And you may be the most unique person in the whole wide world. You're a little snowflake, but listen, your resume is not the place to do it. Be concise, be professional, make it look good. And listen, never send documents that can be edited. Always send a PDF, right? Listen, you're not gonna send an actual paper copy to any place. It's all gonna happen digitally. And listen, for my overachievers in the room, go make a website. Take some of the stuff that you've created, some of the sermons that you preach, or some of the stuff that you've researched, and put it on a website so that people can actually maybe see you and hear you before you ever set foot in a room. I'm serious. Like my brother, he works in Silicon Valley, and he works with all these tech startups. They post their resumes to websites because they know in order to get a job, they have to get the real them up in 30 seconds or less. We need to take a cue from that and try to do the best that we can. Okay, so one last thing about preparation. Clean up your social media posts. Your future employer is gonna go look at your Instagram and your Facebook feed. It totally matters. All right, with planning and preparation covered, we are now at our final point, performance. You've done a lot of planning, you've done a lot of preparing, and it's time now for the interview. You want to be able to put your best foot forward, and you want to be honest, and you want to be transparent, and somehow in just 30 minutes to an hour, communicate your heart and your passion for ministry. And you add to that the pressure that you're going to start feeling and the anxiety that you may be feeling, and these people are staring at you and asking you all these questions. It's pretty easy to bomb an interview when you give in to those things. So I want to give you just a couple things to help you be more successful in those moments. Number one, find out what type of first interview it's going to be. Is it going to be over the phone? Is it going to be over the web? Or is it going to be in person? Knowing what kind of interview you're going to have will help you make the right next steps. If the first interview is by phone, you don't really have to worry about what you're going to look like or whether you're, clean shaven and got a fresh cut. You just need to make sure you got a good phone connection. You just want to make sure that in that time frame that you have over the phone, it's going to be distraction free. You don't want to have to say, hey, hold on a second while you got kids running around in the background. Listen, if it's a web interview or if it's in person, you need to think about what you're going to wear. And knowing what kind of church it is, right? Having done a little bit of research can make a big difference in the type of clothing that you wear. Young churches with young leadership might not have the same expectations that maybe a little bit older church would. And if that's the case, it's a little bit older church or younger church, I'm just saying maybe go get a decent polo or a collared shirt, and under no circumstance, never, ever, ever wear a hat. I don't care what position you're interviewing for. And if you're like me, I interned at a church that was over 50 years old with a large population of senior adults. The dress code mattered. I'm not saying the dress code should matter. This is not a theological discussion. I'm not debating some big theological, biblical point. I'm just telling you, man, you get into the room with people, it matters. And I'm also not saying you got to go spend a lot of money on buying clothes. Just make a trip to the local Goodwill or the Salvation Army, hit up one of your buddies or your folks and be like, listen, I'm just trying to make a good impression. Don't wear t-shirts to interviews. I've seen it too often. It makes a bad impression. And don't let anybody tell you first impressions don't matter, because they do. that may be the only opportunity you have to communicate your heart. And listen, I'm gonna go on a little tangent here just for a second because I see this too often. It's probably time to stop taking life advice, interview advice, or any advice about your future role in ministry from your buddies and your peers who have very little, if any, experience at all. It might be time to stop listening to 20-year-old armchair theologians who've got a lot to say and share endless opinions and have very little to show about real-world practical experience. Okay, tangent over. Next, if you're doing a web interview, be sure you have a calm, quiet area, good lighting, and a strong internet connection. Having recently conducted numerous web interviews, I can assure you these little details, they make a big difference. It's hard to get a feel for a candidate's personality when they keep cutting out because of a bad internet connection. Or like it's really hard to see somebody because they've placed their camera or their laptop like in front of a giant window that's shining a bright light, and so that all that I see is a big silhouette. I actually had to tell a candidate, can you turn the opposite direction because I can't even see you. You might want to test that out before you get into a room digitally with other people who are trying to determine whether you're the right fit for that ministry context, right? It makes a difference. So if the type of interview is in person, make sure you are early, dressed appropriately, and well-groomed. Like, go get your hair did, get a fresh cut. Guys, shave that scraggly beard that ain't doing anybody any favors. And before you even show up on the day of the interview, know where you are going beforehand. Drive the route. Figure out where the place is, just in case, like, you don't want to show up on the day of the interview and get lost somehow and have to call in, hey, I'm supposed to be here for this interview. Oh, but I got lost here. Like, that doesn't leave a very good impression, and it doesn't take very much time to just take seriously these things. Like, you don't want someone's first interaction with you like giving you directions to the place that you could easily have just looked up on your phone. So listen, on the day of the interview, I really want to encourage you to come prepared with a pen and a notepad and preferably your Bible, just in case for whatever reason they start firing off some theological questions. You want a little bit of time to start digging through there as you're thinking and turning to certain passages. Also, make sure turn off your phone or like leave it in the car, right? You don't want to be in an interview and suddenly that ringtone that you thought was really clever starts blaring in a room. That can be super awkward. Listen, I would advise you, like before you have this interview, sit down with somebody that you trust, somebody that's older with you, someone in a professional environment, maybe a professor, and start working on those interview skills. Most of us are not naturally good at being interviewed. We often think we're a little bit better than we actually are. I can remember one candidate, this was years ago, who was so nervous, he basically just apologized the whole time for not being able to answer our questions clearly. And he was like literally apologizing for being so nervous. That didn't go really well for him. It's like, I don't know if we we debriefed after that interview, like, I don't know if we want a guy like that who can't even handle these questions, because in ministry you get a lot of questions. All right, so listen, hopefully you've done some research on the church that you're interviewing. And I mentioned earlier about the importance of asking really good questions. So let me just give you some questions. I want to be a little bit more specific here because I really think it makes a big deal. So, towards the end of the interview, they may ask you if you have any questions, and I would say just pick maybe 2, 3 at the most. And the one that I think would speak volumes if you just asked any interview team, what's the primary prayer that you have as a leadership team right now? That's going to expose their heart and really what they're driving for. You could also ask them, like, what are some of the biggest challenges that you guys are facing as a ministry right now? That might actually show you how you can be a help to them. And then you might ask like a really ministry specific question. So if you're like interviewing for a middle school or a youth ministry position, you might ask, how many students are you currently working with right now in a ministry context? Or how many different high schools and middle schools are in that community? And what are some ways that you guys have worked to plug into those environments? Those are really simple questions that kind of uncover and expose some deeper things. And I'm gonna say one other thing here really quickly. It might not be a bad idea just to ask them, what's the timeline for this hiring process? I mean, to know what to expect in the days ahead can be really helpful and can actually help to curb some of the past interview, post-interview anxiety that you're gonna be feeling. I know as an interviewer, I always tell people up front, here's what today's gonna look like, and if you make it through, here's what tomorrow and the next day is gonna look like too. And listen, this is also a really good point for me to mention this to you, and this is just my opinion, so take it or leave it. Don't ask about money. And if you do, wait till the very, very end of the process. Like if there's 3 interviews in the process, don't ask it on the first one or the second one. Maybe wait till the very end of the third one. That would be appropriate, I would think. But don't ask like, how much does this position pay? You know, you may use the language of like compensation levels. You know, from my vantage point, I'm looking for people who are passionate about ministry. I'm looking for people who have a heart to connect other people to Jesus. I'm not looking for people to just get a paycheck, right? And the honest reality is there are a lot of people out there who just want to go work in a church. They don't have the heart and the drive behind it. I don't want anybody like that on my team. And I would just encourage you, don't bomb the interview by making it all about money. Because listen, ministry, we don't make a lot of money, so why is it a big deal anyway? Anyway, it's just my opinion. All right, so we talked about a lot of things in a really short amount of time, but the bottom line is this. To be more successful at knowing where God is leading you, that's a really big deal. And finding the right ministry fit, you know, getting plugged into a church that you could serve in for years to come and being able to somehow present the real you throughout the interview process, I think there are honestly 3 things that you could focus on right now. And we covered them today: planning, preparation, and performance. I wish you guys the best. God bless. We'll see you later.